I speak often of there kind of being two poles when you discuss anything of a theological nature or of a political nature. It doesn't matter. I'm not the one that came up with this, but it always helps me posit things. You know, and within theological discussion, we speak of the cataphatic tradition, which are all the things in the positive, if you want, the things that we can know about God, things that are readily knowable. But then the apophatic tradition is that which says, you can't know God, right? We are finite, imperfect beings. And God, by definition, is neither of those things. He is infinite and perfect. And so we don't possess the senses, the ability. We were not made in such a way to completely know God. And so that's what sets up the conundrum for the Sadducees is they've got their small world glasses on. And so what Jesus has to challenge their silly example is, well, this is silly. This is a silly example because it's not how it works at all. It kind of goes to a lot of the analogies we've heard of heaven over our lives. You know, streets of gold and mansions that we'll move into. Like, streets of gold, who's cleaning those? And who's fixing the potholes? We know they're coming. Right? We'll be dusting harps. We're going to work. Like, this is eternal life, you know? All these, the pearly gates, as Jim Gaffigan said, what kind of neighborhood is heaven in that it needs gates around it? You know, like all of that imagery, which is just not helpful ultimately. And so here's Jesus saying, you're missing the point of it. But I get it, because to move in a different direction is to create some pain in the space, to go, this is how we understand it. This is how we understand it. And if it's going to be something bigger, I don't know what I can do with that. And that's pain and suffering in the most general sense. And it happens in all of our lives. But the question is always going to come back to what we do with it and how open we are for something to be different. I continue to be fascinated by the reality that when Newton was looking at the wobbly, this thing around the sun, orbit, he was like, this doesn't fit what we know about science. And so he and some others said, you know what, there has to be another planet. Right? There's something between the sun and Mercury that makes it wobble like that. And so they created another planet called Vulcan. If you did not know this, Vulcan existed for about 400 years until Einstein in his theory of relativity said, here's what I understand. And everyone went, oh, that explains Mercury, Vulcan, you're off the map. Literally, Einstein destroyed a planet. People even said they saw it, brothers and sisters. There's recorded. Oh, yep, saw it. Yep, saw it. It's up there. That's what fear will do for you. Fear will create vision of something. No, it has to be that way. And the irony to me at this point in human history, not to pick on scientists, because my point is, the irony is that scientists have become much more mystical and religious people have become much more empirical. They want that which can be proven and to known and to go, but that's so small. I didn't give my life for small. I don't think you're here this morning for small. I think we're here for great things. I think we're here for things that go beyond our experience, but that we glimpse and we taste and we know its goodness and we see how it changes lives. That's what brings us here. I think of Francis de Sales when he had his great crisis of faith, being raised up in the time of predestination. Calvin was huge at the time. And he had this crisis of faith. He thought, well, what if I'm not one of the chosen? And he just does this prayer of abandonment where he just says, I can't control and I can't even know if I'm going to be one of those, if indeed that's what it is. I can't control that. But what I can control is what I do here and now. And he abandoned himself to God. And while the doubt, in some sense, never left him, it completely changed how he lived, how he taught, how he helped people find God. And do you know what changed for him? Not the doubt. The focus changed. He shifted his focus from self to God. What's going to happen to me? And believe me, I understand why we do that. That's a deep-seated survival thing in us. But one of the mysteries of our faith is that that's not what God has done. Even that fight, this event, the cross, is this expiation of sin or is it an act of love? Those are sort of the two poles, if you want to return to that analogy. Well, obviously, in some sense, it's both of those things. But for a long time, the atonement of sin, the expiation, was all that it was. But you realize what that sets up, that God the Father, he killed his son, right? And along comes John Duns Scotus, who says, no. God is infinitely love. And for all space and time, he designed that this act by the Son, in obedience to the will of God, which is love, would do this. And that completely changes the theology. We're not here out of a threat. If you were with my Mass last week, I threatened our brother altar servers and said, be my best friend, I'll kill you. You know, and people, some people have, Father, that's a little intense. But people live that way. Go to church or go to hell. That's the same threat. It's a real good one, by the way. Eternal damnation is a really good threat. But as I said about those brothers, if in 20 years you saw the three of us hanging out, it would not warm your heart. It would continue to creep you out and make you want to stay away from me, right? Oh my gosh, they're still stuck with him? But you see how that applies to our relationship to God. If you're here out of a threat, I hope you challenge that pain and suffering and say, I can't be threatened. I think it's why a lot of people walked away from faith. Because for many years we threatened people, and many just called the bluff. In 20 years of working in high school education, I tell you, sometimes people threaten, whether they threaten with a detention or something, and kids will always call that bluff eventually. That's human nature in us. And so if we want to fill this church, if we want people to be people of faith, then we better be testifying to something more than, you better get in here. They're just going to walk away. That's what they've always done. And ultimately what Jesus said to them was, no, it's not that. It's bigger. It's much bigger than that. And in the end, his big vision caused them to say, kill him. His big vision caused them to go, it's too much. The pain and suffering that creates inside of us, the fear that creates inside of us in terms of, I'm sorry, it's this, and if it's something else, I don't know what I'm going to do with it. And then you return to the example of Francis in his time of crisis, not self, but God. Because brothers and sisters, if you're going to go on this journey with God, if you're going to let God lead you through suffering and abandonment, you better trust him. You better trust God. And we trust God not because we're good. We trust God because God is good. And this mystery is at the heart of it all. It's the heart of the cross. It's the heart of the Eucharist because it's the same sacrifice. Those that do not believe in the real presence of the Eucharist, it's asking too much of them on some level. Can't be. Can't be. I can't imagine how that's really his flesh and blood. I can't imagine it. Therefore, I'm going to set it aside. Rather than say, can I sit with that? Can I shift the focus off of self and move it back to God? Because if it has to make sense in my head only, as Pierre Teilhard de Chardin once said, one of the smartest pre-scientists to ever live, if you can only believe in a God you comprehend, you either have a long head or a short creed. Which is it? We'll profess our creed here in a few minutes, and it's pretty long because we've come to know a lot about God. But I hope what we bring with our knowledge is the childlike wonderment about what we don't know. That impacts how we live in every aspect of our life. In theology, in our politics, in our education, in how we work in our families. All of it, it has to, because truth is universal. The Blade, one of their religion reporters, called me last week. She said, I want to talk to you about this Artemis launch. I saw your Twitter account. I see you're all into space. How do you put these two things together? I said, because to me, the wonderment of God is the expansiveness of it. I'm not afraid of that in one sense. I'm afraid of it because I can't control it, and we love to control things. But I see the beauty in that, and I want to know more about God. I want the wonderment of what God's going to do. And then she said, well, what if we find aliens? Do they have to be evangelized? Well, absolutely, right? And that's the thing about if there are aliens, truth is universal. The cross is a universally salvific act. That's what I'm saying. Like, it just is going to transcend all of our experience on this planet, but all the experience of any of the planet. Shortly after I was ordained, my spiritual director gave me a few gifts before he left. He was moving, and one of them was a piece of a meteor that landed in Arizona, part of the big crash there. And mostly what it is iron. And every now and then I hold it in my hand for the very reason he gave it to me, which was universal truth. And he said, this is iron. It's the same iron that you find here on earth, but it is not from earth. It's from somewhere else. And every now and then when I'm struggling with the pain and the suffering of letting truth take me where truth needs to take me, I remember that it's bigger than me. It has to be bigger than me. And so at a time where a lot of people are peddling fear in the church, fear in our government, fear in our world, I submit to you, brothers and sisters, that ain't not a Christian value. It just isn't. As Leon Bloy once said, there are spaces in our heart that do not exist yet. And the pain and the suffering are going to create the space in which they can exist. And then our heart will be bigger. There'll be more room and space to love. That insight is the cross. That insight is the Eucharist we're about to receive. So bring it, brothers and sisters, to the foot of this altar. Your fear, your doubt, the darkness, all of it, bring it. And as you receive His presence, let it heal you of that in some way. The Eucharist isn't magic. It doesn't make all things better. It's not medicine in that sense. But what it is indeed is the thing that fills our soul, that makes us more like Him. And the thing that He absolutely is universal and bigger than our small vision. May God be praised.